Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in. If, as they say, software is eating the world, then the future of banking and financial services is at this conference. But whether you're iterating on a current pattern or you're doing something completely revolutionary in the banking space, it's going to fail if you can't successfully onboard clients. So no matter who those people are, you need a way of actually bringing them into your business, whether they're corporations or they're individuals. And client onboarding is one of those things that literally every business has some form of. They have to do it. So whether you're Amazon, you got to get customers to set up an account, they've got to put in credit card details, they've got to put in delivery addresses. United Airlines, I've got to set up my traveler profile. Twitter, obviously Elon has some questions about how real the accounts are that are on Twitter, but you've still got to onboard customers. And even to attend this conference, you have to put in your name, your email address, your phone number, your business. You got to put in some details. So there's a form of onboarding in literally every business that we deal with. But when it comes to financial services, it's different. You've got like a literal alphabet soup of compliance regulations that you need to be aware of and you need to follow. So you need to know who your customer is. You need to make sure that they're not laundering money through your services. You need to make sure you're not supporting terrorism. You need to maintain a customer information file. There's a whole bunch of things that you have to do. And if you just take one of those things, like KYC, this is PwC. This team of 5 people at PwC created this fantastic quick reference guide to KYC. It's 671 pages. And that's the quick reference guide to KYC. And the problem is, if you get it wrong, it's really friggin' expensive. So HSBC, just as one example, received $2 billion in fines. Now, granted, they can afford it, but that's still a big number that you have to deal with if you get this stuff wrong. I was reading an article just last week about a credit decisioning service that got wrong for 2,000 customers, and they were fined about, I think it was $1.5 million. So getting this stuff wrong is really expensive. But with all of that alphabet soup of regulations that you need to comply with, you can't make it too hard. And people generally expect when you're dealing with financial services and you're dealing with banking, it is going to be hard. And it's such a big issue that our wonderful friends at First Bank of Colorado, based here in Denver, created this fabulous ad, this TV commercial. I gotta say commercial when I'm in the
From time to time, the process of obtaining a mortgage can be somewhat stressful. It might make you want to pull out your own hair. Or steal a bus and drive it straight off a cliff. Or jump in front of a speeding bus that's been stolen and is driving straight off a cliff. But it doesn't have to be. Introducing the anti-pull your hair out, steal a bus, and then jump in front of it mortgage.
First Bank of Colorado, hands down, do the best commercials I have seen in financial services. It's not hard to say. Has anybody seen that Bank of America ad where everybody's at the wedding? And the lady's saying that, what are they doing on their phones at the wedding? They're banking. It's like, really? Do you honestly think that's what people are doing on their phones at a wedding? It's a slightly jumped up opinion of themselves, I think. But let me continue on that theme and pick on the big 4, because I love picking on the big 4 banks. Let me show you examples of how the big 4 are making onboarding too hard. Now, these are trivial tactical things, but hopefully you guys will understand where I'm coming from. So this is Wells Fargo's application to get a checking account. Great, okay, so I put in my first name, my last name, social security number, and then that bit down the bottom, my driver's license. Now, my home setup, and I work from home most of the time, is that I've got my office in the basement. And upstairs on the main level of the house, I've got a drawer that I put my keys and my wallet in. Now, if I'm downstairs applying for an account with Wells Fargo and I get, driver's license, I haven't got it, I'll do it later. Or maybe I won't. What they should have done is gotten first name, last name, email, phone number. Now you have a lead. So if I don't complete the application, at least you can nurture that lead and say, hey, it looks like you're interested in opening a checking account, anything we can do to help you. Not only are you nurturing the lead, you're also demonstrating that you want that customer's business, which is really important today because there's so much competition. Citibank, they're making it too hard. Their social security number field is a password field. When you click into it, you can't see what you've typed. As you type, you do not see the characters that you're typing as you type. And there is no second entry of your social security number. So hopefully you got it wrong. But it's okay, because if you didn't, they're going to take your name and your address, your date of birth, and your social security number, send it off for identity verification. It's going to fail, and they'll come back and say, sorry, we weren't able to open an account for you. But we can't tell you why. And you've got no idea why. And you're like, what's wrong with Citibank? Chase have an annual technology budget of $12 billion. But if I want to open a bank account with my wife, I have to go into a branch. Are you kidding me? Like, what are they spending that $12 billion a year on if they can't even support that? We've built account opening experiences for credit unions with $2 billion in assets. A fraction of what these guys spend on technology, and you can open joint accounts online. Bank of America. Do you want to add a savings account, yes or no? Fair question. Do you have an offer code? Why don't I have an offer code? I didn't get an offer code. Somebody should have sent me an offer code. I'm going to Google Bank of America offer code, see if there's one out there. Oh, look, when I search Bank of America offer code, the geniuses at First Bank of Colorado, who know I'm in Colorado, say, hey, we'll give you $300 if you want to open a checking account with us. Don't go. And they even say, dump the big banks. So they know exactly what people are out there searching for. So the 4 largest banks in the country are still making mistakes when it comes to this stuff. And it's really important because we're all incredibly time sensitive. Like, we're really busy people. We want every second back that we can get. Hands up. Who'd click the skip intro button? Oh yeah, of course we will. And when I watch a show and it's not there, I don't know if you guys have noticed, Ted Lasso, first episode of every new season, there's only been 2 so far, they don't give you the skip intro button. They force you to watch the credits for the first section. And I'm looking for it. I'm like, where's my skip intro button? Because that's how we've become conditioned. We are time poor, so we're looking for anything that's going to make our lives easy. So it has to be, that onboarding has to be quick and easy. You can't make it too easy. We worked with a bank in Australia who said, you know what? We don't want our customers to fill in an application form. We want to have like a conversational experience. So we're going to replace the labels and the fields with like a chatty kind of question thing. And this wasn't a chatbot. This is just a design of like an application experience where it would say, hey, let's start with your first name. Great, now can we have your second name? What's your email address? How would you prefer it to be contacted? So it was quite conversational. So we built a prototype, we presented it to a bunch of customers, and they went, pfft. The response was, I'm borrowing $500,000. I'm not having a conversation with my teenage child. This isn't WhatsApp. This is a bank loan. This was a mortgage that we had built this experience designed for. So the reaction was actually negative to what we thought would be a nice design. And then obviously there's the fraud issue. That if you make yourself too easy and you don't have the right kind of checks and balances in place, there's a really good chance in the modern environment that you will be a subject to fraud, and that fraud can be expensive. And in Wells Fargo's case, it was their own staff who were actually creating the problem for them. As I said, I love picking on the big banks. And when TransUnion did this survey of US consumers, 44%, which is slightly above the global average, have said, yes, I have been the subject of digital fraud. So businesses are seeing it, consumers are seeing it, we all know that it's real. So we kind of see 2 primary types of fraud in the banking industry when it comes to onboarding. So I'm not talking about account fraud or account takeover and stuff like that. I'm talking about bringing new customers into your bank or your fintech, whatever it is you're working on. The first is the money mule, or first-party fraud. And this is where a criminal actually approaches an individual and says, I can get you a quick $1,000, and you give me $500, but I just need you to open an account with this bank. And people actually sacrifice themselves. They're typically in low socioeconomic environments. Banking is not a thing for them. It's not important to them. They probably don't have a full-time job where they're getting a salary paid and stuff like that. So they're desperately in need of money, and they're willing to basically sacrifice themselves. And the fact that the credit score might be impacted or they'll have a negative qualifier score, they just don't care. It's really hard to combat against that, and it's real. Thankfully, it's the lower end in terms of volume of what we see. The major one is the third-party fraud. And this is where synthetic identities or real identities are actually used by the fraudsters. And thanks to some of the fantastic data breaches that we've had over the last 5-10 years, it's really easy for people to do this these days. According to this chart from Visual Capitalist, we've lost about 17 billion data records in the last 17 years. So about 1 billion pieces of records, full records per year. And finance, you can see down here at the bottom left-hand corner, finance made up about 2 billion of that. Now that's not just our problem. Our other problem are the government records, because social security numbers, date of births, driver's license details, they're all government information. So that also poses a significant problem for us. So we're in an environment now where your name, your date of birth, your address, your social security number, which was compromised in the Equifax breach, and then your email and your employment information, which LinkedIn lost, and the answers to questions like, what's your mother's maiden name? What was the color of your first car? What was the mascot of your high school? Those things have been compromised as well. And when you assemble all of this together, when you take the data from the Equifax breach and you add the data from Yahoo and you add the data from LinkedIn and you add the data from Sony and so on, you can assemble these records into a dossier for an individual. And you basically have all the information required to open an account. So we're in a world where anyone with a credit card can know your customer and can open an account. So let me explain one of the patterns that we're seeing at the moment. As mentioned, the fraudsters are out there, they're going to the dark web and they're assembling these records. And they're using, like a primary key of name, address, date of birth, or social security number, or email address, or something like that. They're using something that gets them all the rest of the information. So imagine a massive spreadsheet where every row in that spreadsheet is an individual. So I've got your name, your address, your date of birth, your social security number, and the answers to all your security questions and so on. So I've got a valid identity. I then combine that with a burner phone. So just go and get a prepaid phone and a burner email address. So I'll go onto Gmail and I'll create an email address specifically for the purposes of fraud. So I've got a perfectly valid identity with a phone number and an email address, and I go and open an account at a bank. This is happening today, and we're working with our clients to address it. When the account is opened, and I'll open that account, and this is a checking account, I'll open it with a minimum deposit of maybe $20, and then I will Zelle $1,000 out of that account into another account that I hold. Because Zelle is a real-time payment network, bank reconciliations are not real-time. They're overnight. So the fraudster gets their hands on the money, pulls it out of the secondary bank account, and the first bank is like, where'd that $1,000 go? There's $20 in this account. And they're left carrying the can for $980. This is happening today. So we're looking at what do we do on the left-hand side to identify the individual and make sure that this fraud is not actually occurring. So as you said, we've got to find this balance between too much friction in the application process, because if you're too hard to do business with, nobody's going to do business with you. Remember the Parks and Rec and the skip intro, that's the mindset that we operate in. But then balancing that with the fraud on the other side of things and making sure that you're not too easy to do business with. And we feel comfortable talking to you guys about it because we've done this a lot. We've built these kinds of account opening experiences at Woodridge for over 30 clients. We've worked with various different service providers. And I just want to be clear, we don't resell the service providers down the bottom. So we're going to talk to you about our experience of working with these and get into some of the details of the do's and don'ts and what works and what doesn't work. But we're not reselling. We're just telling you, giving you the benefit of our experience as to who works. So this column on the left-hand side here is kind of going to be the basis of what we're going to talk through. This is kind of like my table of contents, if you like. So we're going to work down through each of these items, explain what you have to do, what we'd recommend you don't do, and then the things that you should do, and some of the vendors that you can work with, and show you what those kind of implementations look like. So with that, I want to introduce Jamie. Round of applause for Jamie, please, joining us. Jamie is one of our software developers. I used to be a software developer. I really miss those days. I used to finish every day and know exactly what I've achieved. Now I can go an entire quarter and go, what exactly did I do for the last 90 days? So Jamie is one of our architects at Woodridge and works with our clients on the design, the development, and the support of the solutions that we create. Okay, so let's start at the top. Let's work our way down through the greatest hits here. Personally identifiable information. You gotta have a name and an address and an email and a phone number and a date of birth and stuff like that. You have to have that information. Now, there was a time when somebody typing that stuff in gave you enough confidence that, hey, they must know who they are. I must be dealing with the right person because they're actually putting that information in. But with the data breaches, as we've talked about, you can purchase my entire life for somewhere between 50 cents and $10 on the dark web. Depending on how much information you want and whether or not you want credit information and stuff like that, it gets more expensive. But it's not that expensive to buy my entire life.
Yeah, so anytime you're dealing with PII, any application that deals with that, these days you should only be using HTTPS. Obviously fraud and app security are totally different things, but sort of related, so it's worth mentioning. But especially if you do an application for anything in banking, you're going to have to go much farther than what would normally be considered best practices, things like double encrypting database layers, things like that. So I'll talk about a data isolation layer pattern that we use. I think that's extremely important, but I'll talk more about that in a minute.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Pci Compliance, though, is a big one. If you're going to do any payments, that's a huge area to seek out help with. I'm sure you've noticed this week there are so many great partners doing that kind of stuff. To roll your own payment solution would be crazy nowadays, in my opinion. Especially dealing with things like Pci Compliance, they can just handle all of that for you. And then additionally, if you are going to do work for banks or financial institutions, there are stricter requirements, and you should expect to encounter things like even requests for physical security key management devices and things like that.
We work with a solution that uses Amazon KMS for key management. Fantastic solution. And one of the big banks said, no, we want a hardware device managing the keys. So we had to accommodate that, because when it comes to compliance with what the bank is looking for, it's one area, like when it comes to security, it's one area they are not going to compromise on. They absolutely will lay down the law.
So this is a slide about the data isolation layer pattern. It's just a pattern. Don't take it for anything rigid, especially XML. Don't use that if you don't have to. The point of this, though, is that you collect information in a browser or on a device, and you probably do some process where you beam that form data up to your backend periodically. So you need some kind of staging area where you collect that, but then you need to wash all of that information through all of your verification providers. And it's important that when you do that, you capture the verified information somewhere separate from just collected information that can still be changed in the browser. Going past a page that has verification on it is not enough to know that that information won't be changed later in a browser console. So it's important to take a verified response from someone like Lexis or Prove and put it somewhere that is a segregated, verified data layer. It doesn't matter how you do it so much as that you do it.
Thanks, Jamie. Okay, KBA, knowledge-based authentication, out-of-wallet questions. I'm not going to spend any time on this because they suck. So strong recommendation, don't use them. So the concept here was, you may have stolen my identity, but you haven't stolen my brain. You haven't stolen my memory. So I'm going to ask questions that only you should know. Like, which of these addresses have you been associated with? Problem is, Everybody else has asked me the answers to those questions and they've been compromised, so now the answers to those questions have been compromised. It just doesn't work and customers hate it. So just don't use it. Jamie, do you even want to talk about it? Technical challenges?
No, there are so many and they super suck, and you rely so much on a provider to even track this stuff. You can read the list. I don't want to have to think about if I've already failed this person in KBA, did I track that? What questions were they asked? I don't want to think about any of that.
Yeah, let's move on from KBA. Two-factor authentication. So one-time passwords over text message and stuff like that. That only works if you've actually verified that that phone actually belongs to that individual. So if this is the onboarding of a new client, one-time passwords to an email address or a phone number make absolutely no difference. So I wouldn't use them if you're onboarding a new client. I don't think it helps.
Yeah, you all know, I'm sure, phone numbers tie to SIM cards, not devices. So anyone that can get your SIM card can put it in their phone and read your text messages with their device. And yeah, when NIST was doing their research about the security of SMS for this kind of thing, they found a major US telecom was willing to send replacement SIM cards to customers who requested them through an online chat. So something as simple as saying, hey, I don't know, I was cleaning my SIM card and broke it. And they'd say, oh, sure, can you answer a couple questions? Yeah, of course I can. And then you get a new SIM card and you have someone's texts.
Okay, let's get into some of the stuff that actually does work, because there's a bunch of stuff there that doesn't. Document verification, so taking a photograph of a driver's license. This can absolutely be the subject of fraud. However, you are raising the bar. And to an extent, what you can do for the fraudsters is make yourself harder to do business with than the bank or the fintech across the road or at the other URL these days. So let them go there and just protect yourselves. Sometimes you've got to be selfish. And when you look at good quality fakes, like the Colorado driver's license is like an eye test. Like the font is tiny on it, there's watermarks, there's holograms on it. Manufacturing a good quality fake ID is kind of $100, $200. So if I can buy your details on the dark web for $2.50, why would I spend another $100 to manufacture a fake driver's license? Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but you're just raising the bar in terms of how you can kind of counter what the fraudsters are doing. And obviously, yeah, take a photograph of a driver's license, we can pre-fill information. So that reduces the risk of keystroke errors and so on, which can help with that friction that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, if you do something like this, you have to think about what you'll do with browser users that aren't on a device with a camera. But a lot of the modern solutions have really nice ways to handle that. One we saw recently was Vouch, that offers you like a QR code on the screen that you can scan on your phone, and it'll open the ID capture experience on your phone for you, things like that. Camera quality, it used to be more of an issue, but everyone's camera on their phone is amazing these days. Shaky hands and blurry images, most of the solutions recognize that and request a new image, but it does add a little friction. And this big one at the bottom, Derek will talk about a little bit more, but a lot of the vendors like MyTech or some other folks really want to keep those images so they can keep using them to train their algorithms. And if you're talking about banking customers, they may not like that at the bank.
If you ask somebody to take a photograph of their driver's license, you are responsible for the handling of that image. And if the vendor says, oh, but I want to hold on to it to train my algorithm, you're still responsible for that image that just got taken. So if they get compromised and that identity gets compromised as a result, you could be held accountable. So we understand that the vendors want to train their algorithms and make them better, but there's a risk associated with doing it. So just be aware of it if you're getting involved in any of those vendors. Okay, so we can still grab a fake driver's license, or you could steal my driver's license from my wallet. My wallet doesn't have any security on it. At least my phone does, but my wallet doesn't. So if you steal my wallet, you've got my identity. So the next step was, well, let's make sure that the face of the person holding the driver's license actually matches the face that's on the driver's license, so we get into facial recognition. And it definitely helps again.
Yeah, you have the same issue with browser users, but yeah, those solutions are gonna handle that. Yeah, you're dealing with a front camera, which will have lower quality, but they're all so good nowadays. I think you're not going to be held back for these kind of things with that either. And whether you can spoof it or not is, another question, and a lot of funny answers to it.
Some great examples. of the kind of things that people can do and will do in order to spoof facial recognition. So holding up a photograph, wrapping a photograph around your face so it looks like it's got a curve, cutting the eyes out of a photograph so you can actually see the eyes into the picture, holding up a video feed like on an iPad or something like that so you can see movement and things like that, digitally superimposing, or then going to like the Mission Impossible style masks and actually putting those on in order to try and fool the facial recognition. Okay, so yeah, I can fool the facial recognition with an image, so I can find an image that matches the driver's license, you know, if I'm doing that kind of photo ID. What if we check for liveness? What if we make sure that it's not actually just a photograph? That I'm not looking at a photograph or an iPad or something like that. And so the concept of liveness detection was introduced to try and help address that, the possibility of fakes in frauds. The liveness detection can be spoofed as well, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a second.
Yeah, you'll see a demo of how the folks at OCR Labs are doing their selfie capture, but you can actually, some of you may know this, but you can actually detect the effect of a beating heart on the skin if you have a high enough resolution camera. Obviously, we're talking about photoplethysmography. You probably all recognize that already, but a similar thing to what your watch can do, like an Apple Watch can do to read your heartbeat that way through your skin.
That blew my mind, the fact that they can detect a heartbeat through the skin using the selfie camera on a phone. So we've actually got let's have a look at this. It's a company out of Australia, OCR Labs, who's pioneering identity verification.
A user takes a photo of their ID. There's no need to select their document type or issuing country. OCR Labs automatically analyzes IDs and lets the user know in real time if the document was accepted or not. Next, the user verifies their identity with a smile. We check for liveness by analysing minuscule movements just before and after the customer captures their selfie, like an Apple Live photo. We compare their ID to their selfie to verify that it's the same person, and then analyse their identity document to make sure it's genuine. We then send the results to you in seconds. You can access them in your client portal or pull them directly.
So as I mentioned, we're not working with these, we don't resell these, we've just seen these solutions in the market and think, hey, they actually work. This is pretty cool tech and it performs really well as well. So the last two that we're going to talk about here for me are the least used and in many ways the most useful. Because with so much of our identity information having been compromised, our digital stuff is actually in a better situation where we can leverage it. And I'm talking about email addresses on our devices. So email verification. So I'm not talking about verifying like a one-time password to an email address to make sure the email address exists. That doesn't help me at all. That could be the fraudster's email address. But what I do want to know is the email address trustworthy? So is it on a domain like woodridgesoftware.com? Because if it is, that's a hell of a lot harder to create a fake email address on than Gmail. So is it a corporate domain or something like that I can trust? And then secondly, does it appear on a white list or a black list? So there are service providers out there who have white lists of addresses. So they've got contributory databases that it might have the likes of an Amazon or a Macy's or United Airlines or Twitter or whatever actually saying, hey, I've seen that email address. First time I saw it was 7 years ago. You see an email address that's been around for 7 years and it's got tenure, you've got a level of confidence that, okay, this is looking better, than a Gmail address that was created yesterday should set up a red flag for everybody. And then there's the blacklist where, that email address was actually reported as being used in fraud. So it's absolutely not one that you want to trust. We saw it yesterday. Somebody reported it in a fraudulent transaction.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about emailage in another slide here.
So there's a couple of examples, emailage, I'll see on that you can take a look at and see if there are services that could help you out. Emailage, just to give you an example, they've got 6 billion email addresses that they have on file. 30 million confirmed fraud events in 2019 according to their website, and they see 82,000 fraud events reported by their partners, those people who are contributing to their database to try and help us all recognize if an email address is good. 82,000 a day that they're saying. So That's the kind of database that you want to be tapping into and saying, hey, you guys have all this intel, I want to use it to make sure that I'm onboarding the right customers.
Yeah.
Somebody just jump to the next.
Let's go ahead and look at the next one. Yeah, the emailage API is kind of a wall of text. It's got a ton of useful information. There is one score that kind of tries to boil it all down, but it's really risky trying to do an integration with something like this and think that this one score, you know that one score is what you need. If you ever do integrate directly with something like this, Emailage is a Lexis product, so you could always do it through them. But if you do it yourself, all the vendors have really nice account reps and good technical resources that can validate your implementation, things like that, and that's really important. We're going to look at another one, Iovation, in a little bit, that Derek has a good example of someone who had done their own integration with it, thought they had used all the relevant information, was still seeing device fraud, and Iovation told them it's because they weren't looking at a relevant piece of info. So Emailage is another one. Make sure you know what all that is if you're going to roll your own. And yeah.
The other thing to note with the Emailage API, you can see on the left here what we're passing in is not just the email address, but also the name. So we're saying, hey, somebody's trying to open an account using this email address, and this is their first name and last name. So when Emailage look at it against their whitelist, they go, yeah, I've seen that email address associated with that first name and last name previously. So it could be a completely valid email address, but I'm trying to use Jamie's email address with my personal details to open an account, and it's going to flag that and go, no, I've never seen that combination previously. So it's given us that additional intel to try and make sure, yeah, we know who we're dealing with. And then there's device-based verification. So phone in my pocket, I'm presenting, and I still have my phone in my pocket. They're very rarely, more than 3 feet away from us? Isn't that the statistic? It's like never more than 3 feet away from us. So if your device is compromised or lost or stolen, you know pretty much immediately, oh crap, where's my phone? So it's an incredibly useful device for us in trying to verify that we know who the individual is. The challenge is, can I associate that device with that name and address and date of birth and social security number and so on? So can I create a match between the device, the carrier, and the identity and say, yes, this is on a whitelist? We've seen this previously. So
yeah, we'll look a little bit at Iovation too, but yeah, there are a lot of good vendors for this. There's the device-specific fraud prevention, so excuse me, something like Iovation knows whether a device has already been used in fraud, and I like to imagine the phone is like out there himself, like sticking people up in a dark alley. And then Phone Finder and Prove, yeah, they do the association of a device with an identity. Yeah, there are challenges with these solutions because people on, say, corporate cell phone plans, Prove is not going to see their last name on their cell phone bill when they try to look that up, and family plans might be the same thing if you changed your name after you got married or something. These all execute some client-side JavaScript that they provide you, at least the device prevention ones, and that's there so that they can capture all the fingerprint info about the device itself and then beam that up and send it off to their API to tell you all about it. The next slide is an Iovation API, I think. Yeah, this is the typical Iovation implementation. The poor cat got crit with a wall of text for over 9,000. It's like Emailage that there's a ton of important information there, and you'd be really taking like a huge risk in doing something silly if you integrated with this and just looked at like one piece of data and thought, oh, this is an aggregated risk score and I'm okay just looking at this. Iovation integrates really nicely with Alloy, but you can also, in the case Derek had where an Iovation customer had implemented it a sort of incomplete way, you can get help from them as well, figuring out what everything in that response is and how you can use it and things like that.
So what Iovation is going to do is when somebody hits the web page, they're going to create a fingerprint from the device. They execute some client-side JavaScript code, and then they send it to their database and say, hey, have we seen this device before? And it could be, yeah, we saw that device yesterday buying some stuff on Amazon, it's all good. Or it could be, yeah, we saw that device yesterday and it was involved in insurance fraud or medical fraud or banking fraud. And they will immediately let you know, and you can just go, I'm shutting you down straight away. So they're just looking at the device, the physical device. But there are other services like LexisNexis Phone Finder where they will combine the phone number with the name and the address. And say, have we seen that phone number associated with that name and address previously? And if so, has it been involved in fraud or not? And how long ago did we first see that phone number associated with that name and address and so on? And like my 10-year-old and 12-year-old both have their own phone numbers. And they're probably going to stick with them for life. So they're already building a history and a digital footprint associated with those numbers. The devices will change. Chances are the phone numbers won't. So we're building this history. And what you're seeing here is like from Lexis, this is like their PDF pretty print version of what you get in the API response. So they're basically sending you back all this information. And in this case, they're boiling it down to a fail. And then they'll give you the reasons why they think you should fail this individual's identity, because that phone number is not a good match for that individual. And Prove, they're like the Rolls Royce, in my opinion, of what people are doing from a verification perspective. So they've built relationships with all the carriers, even AT&T. AT&T are the one who say, you can't have access to our data, but what they don't tell you is Prove can have access to our data. So they've actually got a relationship, including all of the major carriers, where they will verify the phone number is a good phone number, it's a postpaid number, it's in good standing. The SIM card hasn't been swapped in the device, and the name and address matches the individual, and the device is on the network right now. And the IMEI of the device matches what the carrier thinks it should be for that phone number. It is a really deep check that they do very, very quickly.
And the point of this one is that no one's being crushed by a wall of text, and no one's being critically hit for over 9,000. I know what everything in the Prove pre-fill API response is. I'm comfortable just integrating with this and using it to verify that the phone number makes sense for this identity, and then pre-fill all of the information that Prove can tell me about them. So you can skip typos, you can use only verified information right off the bat.
Let me show you what that looks like. So this is real. I've masked out my phone number. Although you guys are all my friends, I should have just given you my phone number. You could have texted me. So I went to the Lowe's store card website. I went to Lowe's and I said, hey, I'm going to apply for a credit card. And Prove is the service provider. Synchrony Bank is the bank behind the Lowe's store card, and Prove is behind this. So all I entered was the last four of my social and my cell phone number. That is it. There's a button down the bottom that says verify my identity. Now I can choose not to. The fantastic thing about it was the customers who choose not to makes up about 7% of the population, and that 7% contains 100% of the attempted fraud at Synchrony Bank for this particular product. So it's like they created a big gate that says, hey, fraudsters over here, and they all walk through it, whereas the 93% who don't have all been valid customers in this instance. So I'll put in 4 digits and then my phone number, and I hit continue, and the web page changes and says, hey, grab your phone, we just sent you a message. I pull up my phone, there's a text message with a fortified link inside the text message. I click on the link, I get a web page on the other side saying, your phone is being verified. I go back to the browser on my desktop, full name, full address, phone number, full social security number, all pre-filled. We live in a world where if somebody is typing in a name, an address, a date of birth, and a social security number, I have no idea if that's actually the owner of that information or not. So I am much happier if this stuff gets pre-filled when I'm trying to onboard a customer from some kind of a verified source. I am way more confident about that individual's identity than if all that information had been typed in, as demonstrated by the 7% versus 93% that we talked about. So not only is this a slick experience from a consumer's perspective, it's also a really strong fraud prevention. And you saw in the API, we pass in 2 things, the phone number and the last 4 of the social. Because what's happening here is the phone number is being matched to the last 4 of the social at the carrier. What Prove are saying is, hey, this phone number, this last 4 of social, does that match your database? The carrier goes, yes. And go, okay, this is the IMEI of the device. Does that match? And they go, yeah, that's the one that we expected to see. Oh, and by the way, that device is active on our network right now. It doesn't look like the SIM is being swapped or anything dodgy has happened. All that's okay? Yep, great. Bang. Here's a full identity record for you. And where's my friends from Alloy? Anybody here? Thank you, guys. The guys at Alloy have made this so much easy for you guys. They've taken, what are you up to, like 60 vendors that you've integrated to, 350 API, separate API calls across all those vendors. The numbers are huge, but they have standardized all of the various APIs from Experian and Equifax and LexisNexis and TransUnion and Prove. They've standardized those calls, and they give you a graphical design tool to say, hey, I want to call that one and then that one, and only call this one if that condition is met. They've just simplified the whole process of KYC and AML.
I'll give you a quick look at Alloy's dashboard. So yeah, if you had a whole bunch of third-party integrations for fraud prevention, you could manage them here. On a future slide, I'm going to show you how you can kind of like configure third-party integrations as decision points. So if something happens, if I get a certain response from this, I want to do a certain thing. And I used the emailage one as an example. I don't actually know if you can even use that in LA, and that's not the point. But here's an example where it's like you can get some help parsing other pieces out of this response that you might not have known what to do with. The two examples here are like, is this a disposable email address? Is it an auto-generated email address? And finally, can you supply a risk score? Which, yeah, emailage could work for all of those things and a lot more. And then you can configure on the right. You can see what you want to do in certain scenarios. That was an example where they sent them to an anti-money laundering review, but this one might be, who knows, the email address is, anyway, declined or reviewed.
Okay, so just to wrap up, as I said, we've done this for a bunch of different customers and we learned a lot about it. So we kind of created this like pyramid of, our recommendation for you if you're trying to onboard a new customer. You have to get verified personal information. There's no, you need a name, you need an email address, you need a phone number, you need a physical address and so on. Just make it as easy as possible. Pre-fill services can be great at that. If you can tap into, my Google account and use that to pre-fill, great. Whatever you can do to make that easy, do it. Next, and we recommend you do this early in your onboarding process, verify the email address because it's cheap. Calling LexisNexis to do emailage calls is cheap. Like I'm talking cents. Per email address. And if you can verify that that email address has tenure, it's never been involved in fraud previously and so on, you're building your confidence that you're actually dealing with the right individual. The next thing I'd recommend you do is device verification. So whether it's Iovation and threat metrics where you're just doing the fingerprint on the device and then verifying it, again, cheap. Those aren't expensive calls, either from a computational perspective or a dollars and cents, they're cents. And computationally, it's less than half a millisecond to generate the device fingerprint, send it to them, and get a response back from their database. It's typically less than 500 milliseconds to get that response. And then finally, if you're really serious about this stuff, get that identity document and do the facial recognition with the liveness detection. And even if you don't do the facial recognition with the liveness detection, at least asking for an identity document, taking a photograph of it, verifying that it is a real document or a really good quality fake, you have raised the bar to a level where the majority of the fraudsters out there are going to say, you're too hard to do business with as a fraudster, so I'm going to take my business elsewhere. And finally, last slide. Use your partners. So if you work with an Alloy, or an Emailage, or a Prove, or LexisNexis, or Experian, lean on them for their expertise. And as Jamie mentioned, I've got first-hand example of this from a very large financial institution who used Iovation for device-based fraud detection. So they were generating a fingerprint, sending it off to Iovation, response came back, and they used it badly. In the response, the API response back from Iovation, there was a flag that said previous financial evidence. That was the name of the flag, previous financial evidence, and it was either true or false. They were ignoring that flag. The bank was ignoring the flag because they didn't understand it, so they went, oh, that's fine, I don't care about it. What it meant was previous financial evidence equals true means, oh, another financial institution has flagged that device as having been used in fraud at their institution. As a bank, wouldn't you want to know that? So when the bank did experience fraud, we asked Iovation, take a look at how they've configured your API. And Iovation's immediate response was, why are you ignoring that? And when they looked at the accounts that had been opened fraudulently, every single one of them had triggered a true on that flag. So I know you guys are developers and you love playing around with shit, and that's awesome. But when it comes to these kinds of things, lean on the partners and ask them, hey, have I set this up correctly? Am I going to get the best possible results out of your service calls if I, do it the way I've done it? And you'll be onboarding millions of customers very happily with zero fraud. As we said, future of banking and financial services is at this conference. But you need to onboard customers successfully without friction or fraud. And we're Woodridge, and hopefully that has been a useful session for everybody. Thank you so much. Have we got time for any questions, if anybody, or we can hang around? Anybody got any burning questions? Alex Jimenez, you should have opinions.
No. This is great. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. Cool. Well,
We
we'll
will
hang
hang
out
around.
here, guys. If you have any questions, come see us. Thank you.
Good job.